Thank you very much. Well, let me join the others in congratulating Barney for bringing this this gathering together, and thanks particularly for the privilege and the honor of being invited to participate. What I will talk about kind of follows straight into the last point that John made about failed states. I want to raise two issues that I think are really basically really problematic for me in the way that North-South relations are being brought out in the current international agendas. And one has to do with development aid policies and how they deal with failed states or fragile states or whatever they're called, in the context of the kind of consensus, the Monterey consensus that we have. And the second is MDG. So let me just start with this notion of what you refer to as failed states. I mean, when we talk about failed states, we are imagining countries like Somalia, where the central state has actually really collapsed. But I think that there are rather few of those countries. The fact, though, is that there are many very weak states or states facing violent conflict. So there is a large number of poor countries that are obviously the countries that are most in need of development aid, that are fragile or that face either that are experiencing or face the potential for civil war. And of course, I'm a little embarrassed talking about this in front of Francis Stewart, who knows so much more about this than I do. But I did this study of looking at thinking about these problems in connection with poverty and human rights. And when you look at the data, you see that the worst performing and the poorest countries of the world, so by the standards of the MDGs, the countries farthest away from achieving them and making the least progress. So by that definition, we identify 64 countries, and this was sort of based on the work that was done in the Human Development Report 2007 that I updated. So you identify these 64 countries which are just growing very slowly, making very little progress in reducing mortality, making very slow progress in improving education, and so forth. Well, out of those 64 countries, 43 have been affected by some kind of violent conflict or civil war in the last 2 decades. So that's a very large proportion of countries. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you have 31 out of the 47 or so countries of sub-Saharan Africa that have experienced violent conflict. And if you actually expand your definition of violent conflict a little bit, you might have even more, because the normal definition of violent conflict or civil war is armed conflict that involves the state. And in some countries you have violent conflicts, politically motivated violent armed conflict that does not involve state as a party. So this is a big problem that of poor countries. So this is a very major component of the development challenge. It's a very major component of the global poverty problem that we are facing. But this is a contradiction between that fact and the current aid priorities and the current aid agenda and the current philosophy of aid today, which is the Monterey Consensus, which entrenched this principle of reward the good performer. the principle of reward the good performer is basically this bargain, you know. You country, you do your best, put in place good policies and institutions, and we'll give you more aid. Well, it's precisely the country's least fault to have good policies and institutions that are in need of help. And you could say, well, of course, maybe they don't need financial help, maybe they need something else. But, you know, there's a sort of but because much of the intellectual work for devising this aid agenda has focused on these what are good policies and so forth, there is now have this category called fragile states, which is sort of like a residual, you know, states that we don't know what to do with in terms of development aid. And I think this is a real problem. And I mean, everybody who's looked at this category of fragile states says, well, you know, even the definition is so diverse and diffuse that we can't quite figure out what anyone's talking about. So quite apart from that kind of conversation that seems to be going on, I mean, I think there is a real fact that many, you know, I would say the majority of the countries, I'm so glad Carolyn has just walked in, the majority of countries that are in, where the problems of poverty and development are most entrenched are also countries that are facing violent conflict. And this is not getting the kind of priority in the aid agenda that we need. I think both in terms of sort of priorities for allocation of aid, but also in terms of policies for aid. Because the other is that I would contend, you know, that everybody says you need, you know, there's no peace without development, there's no development without peace, but actually some kind of development creates violence. So it's not that you need development for peace, you need the right kind of development for peace. And the right kind of development for peace would be the kind that would address things like horizontal inequality that Francis has done pioneering work on, you know, and there are other socioeconomic correlates of civil war that have been identified by others, which I think are quite relevant, like, you know, neighborhood lovers and, you know, the youth bulge, youth unemployment, like that, which need to be addressed in the context of development agendas, development priorities that are actually not, in fact, currently being considered to be priorities. I mean, for example, if we think about, you know, a whole bunch of unemployed youth ready to be recruited into sort of militias and things as a risk factor, employment is not mentioned in most PRSPs. There's a study that sort of went through all the PRSPs and shows, I can't remember the exact number, but barely even mentioned as part of the development agenda. So I mean, I think there's a lot we need to do to bring back some of these connections between violent conflict, poverty, peace, as part of the global challenges, and that that the way that we've approached the problems of priorities for aid has really bypassed these issues. So the second point that I just briefly want to get to is that the other sort of central pillar of current North-South policies, if you like, the development policy, is the MDGs. Well, we all leave the MDGs for what they are, but we all have a tendency to forget about what they don't have. And the Millennium Declaration has this whole set of the issues, in fact, like peace, human rights, democracy in there, but the Millennium Declaration misses, the Millennium Development Goals miss them out. And it's not, and that's okay as if you say that there is no relationship between the MDG types of goals like, universal primary education or cutting child mortality. But I think that the real lessons of the 1990s in development thinking and development studies, and a lot of the work that we have done in the human development reports, point to all manner of issues like empowerment and all the things that Mary Robinson was talking about as being part and parcel of the problems of poverty, that unless women are empowered to demand their rights, you will not put into place, generate the kind of social and political movements within societies where they will demand their rights and demand the kind of policies that would deliver universal education or improvement in child mortality. So I think that in a way, all of the full agenda that was generated in the 1990s UN conferences, in the Human Development Reports, and even in documents like the World Development of the World Bank, 1990 on poverty, 1995 on equity, that emphasize the need for sustainability, empowerment, equity, political reforms, greater attention to human rights, civil, political, economic, social, cultural, as a way of really getting that priority to poverty. I mean, I think that it's a very stripped down, watered down agenda, which actually takes us backwards. So I think that these are these two pillars of current aid policy, which I think are sort of taking us backwards in some respects than forwards. Sorry to be so depressing.